Chapter 1 of Ivan Turgenev's Fathers and Sons. I'm going to play portions of it for you since I tried to read it and I stink. It was becoming too stressful. So I will just play this by chapter. Don't try to sell these great videos. I'll take them off when we're done with them. Notice the relationship between the great landowner and the serf undergoing a great change during this time. The situation in Russia during this time, the time of this book, is analogous to the conditions found in the southern states of America in the 1840s and 50s. These serfs were completely at the mercy of wealthy landowners. And in 1862, serfs were granted complete freedom. But before that time, most of the more advanced landowners and thinkers had voluntarily freed their serfs in the manner that Kirsanov and Bazarov had done. So that is an important part of understanding this novel. First, this first chapter gives us an indication that this is a time of change, because Turgenev is referring to Peter as one of the new emancipated servants. We're going to see the technique that Turgenev uses here, where he interrupts the narrative briefly and addresses the reader directly to give us some background or information. Realists don't usually interrupt the narrative quite so much, but Turgenev is using kind of a traditional technique of speaking directly to the reader, and then a more recent technique of presenting scenes directly without intruding. I just want you to notice, really I think the most important part of us, one of the themes that we've seen repeatedly is this theme of generations. This is fathers and sons, or fathers and children, is what it's really supposed to be called. And I just want you to notice pay attention to the contrasts in thinking, the way that different generations relate to one another, and what happens when you are a young person trying to find yourself and your parents are sort of intruding upon that, and you respect them sometimes, but it's complicated. It's going to be fun. Here we go. I'm going to play it for you. Please read along if you can. I think that you guys looking at the text is key. So I have included Ms. Hobbs scanned all these pages for you, and it's also available at bartleby.com. Please, guys, look at the words as well and don't just listen. But here you go. I'd rather you just be familiar with the piece.
By Ivan Turgenev, translated by Constance Garnett, read by Sean Renette. This unabridged audiobook was produced in the year 2010 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Chapter 1. Well, Pyotr, not inside yet? Was the question asked on May the 20th, 1859, by a gentleman of a little over 40 in a dusty coat and checked trousers, who came out without his hat on to the low steps of the posting station at S. He was addressing his servant, a chubby little fellow with whitish down on his chin and little lackluster eyes. The servant, in whom everything, the turquoise ring in his ear, the streaky hair plastered with grease, and the civility of his movements, indicated a man of the new, improved generation, glanced with an air of indulgence along the road, and made answer, "No, sir, not in sight." "Not in sight," repeated his master. "No, sir," responded the man a second time. His master sighed and sat down on a little bench. We will introduce him to the reader while he sits, his feet tucked under him, gazing thoughtfully round. His name was Nikolai Petrovich Kirsanov. He had 12 miles from the posting station a fine property of 200 souls, or as he expressed it, since he had arranged the division of his land with the peasants and started a farm of nearly 5,000 acres. His father, a general in the army who had served in 1812, a coarse, half-educated, but not ill-natured man, a typical Russian, had been in harness all his life, first in command of a brigade and then of a division, and lived constantly in the provinces where, by virtue of his rank, he played a fairly important part. Nikolai Petrovich was born in the south of Russia, like his elder brother Pavel, of whom more hereafter. He was educated at home till he was 14, surrounded by cheap tutors, free and easy, but toadying adjutants, and all the usual regimental and staff set. His mother, one of the Kolyazin family, as a girl called Agatha, but as a general's wife, Agatha Klea Kuzminisha Kirsanov, was one of those military ladies who take their full share of the duties and dignities of office. She wore gorgeous caps and rustling silk dresses. In church, she was the first to advance to the cross. She talked a great deal in a loud voice, let her children kiss her hand in the morning, and gave them her blessing at night. In fact, she got everything out of life she could. Nikolai Petrovich, as a general's son, though so far from being distinguished by courage that he even deserved to be called a funk, was intended, like his brother Pavel, to enter the army. But he broke his leg on the very day when the news of his commission came, and after being 2 months in bed, retained a slight limp to the end of his days. His father gave him up as a bad job and let him go into the civil service. He took him to Petersburg directly he was 18 and placed him in the university. His brother happened about the same time to be made an officer in the Guards. The young men started living together in one set of rooms under the remote supervision of a cousin on their mother's side, Ilya Kolyazin, an official of high rank. Their father returned to his division and his wife, and only rarely sent his sons large sheets of gray paper scrawled over in a bold, clerkly hand. At the bottom of these sheets stood in letters enclosed carefully in scrollwork the words Pyotr Kirsanov, General Major. In 1835, Nikolai Petrovich left the university, a graduate. And in the same year, General Kirsanov was put onto the retired list after an unsuccessful review and came to Petersburg with his wife to live. He was about to take a house in the Tavrichesky Gardens and had joined the English club, but he died suddenly of an apoplectic fit. Agatha Klea Kuzminisha soon followed him. She could not accustom herself to a dull life in the capital. She was consumed by the ennui of existence away from the regiment. Meanwhile, Nikolai Petrovich had already, in his parents' lifetime, and to their no slight chagrin, had time to fall in love with the daughter of his landlord, a petty official, Preplavensky. She was a pretty and, as it is called, advanced girl. She used to read the serious articles in the science column of the journals. He married her directly the term of mourning was over, and leaving the civil service, in which his father had by favor procured him a post, was perfectly blissful with his Masha, first in a country villa near the Liesny Institute, afterwards in a town in a pretty little flat with a clean staircase and a drafty drawing room, and then in the country, where he settled finally, and where in a short time a son, Arkady, was born to him. The young couple lived very happily and peacefully. They were scarcely ever apart. They read together, sang and played duets together on the piano. She tended her flowers and looked after the poultry yard. He sometimes went hunting and busied himself with the estate while Arkady grew and grew in the same happy and peaceful way. 10 years passed like a dream. In 1847, Kirsanov's wife died. He almost succumbed to this blow. In a few weeks, his hair was gray. He was getting ready to go abroad, if possible, to distract his mind. But then came the year 1848. He returned unwillingly to the country, and after a rather prolonged period of inactivity, began to take an interest in improvements in the management of his land. In 1855, he brought his son to the university. He spent 3 winters with him in Petersburg, hardly going out anywhere and trying to make acquaintance with Arkady's young companions. The last winter, he had not been able to go. And here we have him in the May of 1859, already quite gray, stoutish, and rather bent, waiting for his son, who had just taken his degree, as once he had taken it himself. The servant, from a feeling of propriety, and perhaps too not anxious to remain under the master's eye, had gone to the gate and was smoking a pipe. Nikolai Petrovich bent his head and began staring at the crumbling steps. A big mottled fowl walking treading firmly with its great yellow legs. A muddy cat gave him an unfriendly look, twisting herself coyly round the railing. The sun was scorching. From the half-dark passage of the posting station came an odor of hot rye bread. Nikolai Petrovich fell to dreaming. My son, a graduate, Arkasha, were the ideas that continually came round again and again in his head. He tried to think of something else, and again the same thoughts returned. He remembered his dead wife. She did not live to see it, he murmured sadly. A plump, dark blue pigeon flew into the road and hurriedly went to drink in a puddle near the well. Nikolai Petrovich began looking at it, but his ear had already caught the sound of approaching wheels. "It sounds as if they're coming, sir," announced the servant, popping in from the gateway. Nikolai Petrovich jumped up and bent his eyes on the road. A carriage appeared with 3 posting horses harnessed abreast. In the carriage, he caught a glimpse of the blue band of a student's cap, the familiar outline of a dear face. "Arkasha! Arkasha!" cried Kirsanov, and he ran, waving his hands. A few instants later, his lips were pressed to the beardless, dusty, sunburnt cheek of the youthful graduate.
Arkasha! Arkasha! You could see why I couldn't read it. I may up the speed on that a little bit, but I think in order to get the basic information of a book, we should probably go slowly in the beginning. That was chapter 1.